I will do the best I can to be both valuable and entertaining and brief all at the same time. So with that said, let me bring the slides up here. And in the vein or in the spirit of saving time, who here did not see me speak yesterday? Oh, okay. Afton, you know who I am. How are you? So very briefly, I'm Ben Lawson. I'm with Burk I.T. Hopefully you got a chance to meet our great team that was here, Tyler and Stephanie and Michael and everybody that's Brady who have been here this week. We'd be happy to talk to you about any managed service needs you might have. And this is me. I have been doing this for a long time and love to be able to discuss and share about cybersecurity and what we need to do to be safe and secure. So that's where we're going to spend our time today. And as Tina said, I previewed this a little bit yesterday. Today's exercise is different from many of the tabletops that I do because I actually have been working with an organization going through this attack scenario. And we've been involved in what tools work, what tools don't work, what they had thought of, what they hadn't thought of, what they needed our help with, what we wish they would have had in place to mitigate some of this. So I can speak to some very significant real world scenarios as we walk through this. So what we're going to do today, we're going to navigate a week-long ransomware attack. And as I've done in the past, I've done this, I think this is the third year I've done this. I'm not going to make you get in little pods and stuff, but come together as 3 or 4 or 5 groups. We're going to, as we go through this, we're going to review multiple scenarios. And I'd like you to break into groups. We're going to spend about 5 minutes discussing some questions that I'm going to propose and then other things that you may come up with. Then we'll come out of that 5-minute session each time and discuss those questions and provide feedback to one another. The only way this works is if we're interactive. So talk to one another, and then when I come back, talk to me so that we can all share with each other and understand what works, what doesn't, who's had good ideas in different areas, what we can share, how everybody in this room can get stronger as we go through this exercise. So like I said, we'll have some 5-minute breaks. Michael created an incredibly cool little countdown timer, which works well. Really quick, I have to apologize. Michael, is my mic working? Are we good? All right, sorry. Michael's been trying to record me in these sessions, and I have messed up his technology every time. So I want to be courteous of all he's trying to do to make sure we capture this. And when we get to the end, we'll spend a little time in Q&A, a recap, and lessons learned as a group on what we got out of this exercise. So the threat actor for this scenario is the Inc. ransomware, or INC ransomware group. This is, like I said, a real world scenario. These folks exist. They've been around. They started operating in the summer of 2023. This is not just ransomware. This is a ransomware extortion attack methodology. So they not only get in through a variety of different methods, but they not only enter your organization and encrypt files and ask for a ransom, they also download information and then extort you for the removal of that information from the dark web. So it is that new 2-pronged attack that we're seeing in most ransomware scenarios these days. So a double whammy in terms of how you have to deal with it, how you want to get your forensic teams and your cyber insurance folks in play to help navigate this. They like to position themselves, this is very funny, I'll show you the real world language that they use, but they like to position themselves as a service to their victims, that they're not really so much stealing and attacking as showing you where you have vulnerabilities and misconfigurations and how they'd like to help you fix that for a small fee. And small fee being relative. The last ransom that I saw from these folks that I'm dealing with was 600,000 US. So they're proud of what they do, and they talk all about that. They do provide, it's very interesting, they have incredibly good customer service. They provide great feedback. They provide test files. They provide sample decryption methodologies. They provide advice on how to fix the holes and everything that they've done once they're paid. So they are here to help and to take a lot of your money while they do it. So we want to avoid that. We want to talk amongst ourselves and hopefully get stronger before we have to deal with this type of attack. So event 1, VPN activity. We're going to talk about VPN for a little bit of time. Sally Worksome is authorized in your organization for remote VPN access. Sally, because she doesn't use VPN that frequently, to save cost on the cost of that token and that license, her account is exempted from the multi-factor authentication requirement for remote VPN. Sally hasn't used her VPN for 45 days prior to this event, but suddenly she's authenticated multiple times each evening for the last 5 days. And connections have been from multiple locations throughout the U.S. as well as several foreign countries. So here's where we're going to break into groups. I want you to consider these questions and think about these for your organization and how you would deal with this. Are all your VPN users, all of them, required to use token or certificate-based multi-factor authentication to connect? Are usage tendencies, so in other words, are you looking at how users tend to use VPN, when they VPN, how often they VPN? Are these tendencies tracked and monitored and logged within your organization? So do you have a good feel for when people do and do not VPN, how often, and from where? Do you have geolocation filters in place for your VPN? In other words, you control where folks can VPN from and when. And if you notice this type of activity, would this activity trigger your incident response plan? So like I said, I'm going to start a clock. This little dial is going to start turning orange. When it is completely orange, our 5 minutes are up, and we will come back and discuss as a group. So break into however little mini pods you'd like, and let's discuss. All right, our time is up, so let's come back together as a group and discuss this as a whole, see what everybody figured out. So, first and foremost, does anyone here not require multi-factor authentication for client-based VPN in any scenario? I saw that, Brian. Everybody, I hope, understands the importance of that. Quick show of hands, who here requires all users to use MFA when they authenticate to your network, local PC and everything? Good, 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 good. We are quickly reaching a point where multi-factor authentication, not just for remote access, not just for domain admin credentials or system administrative credentials, all users should be using MFA anytime they sign on to a resource. That is critically important, and you'll see the importance of that as we talk through how some of these compromises happen. What about tendency tracking? How many of you track VPN usage tendencies within your organization, monitor that and log that information, and look at it on a very regular basis? Good. Tina gave me half a hand. I don't know what that means, but Gotcha. This is something important you need to do. You need to be able to not just be able to forensically look back in these scenarios, but have a good idea of what is my baseline usage for my employees. If you don't have, and baseline usage is important for everything you do in your environment. You should have a baseline for what your network traffic looks like, what your firewall usage looks like, CPU load, typical number of folks connected to the network, VPN usage, point-to-point based VPN use, all of those things. If you don't have a baseline, then there's no way for you to tell me something's anomalous. You have no way to say it's out of the normal if you don't know what normal is. And this applies to VPN usage as well. In this scenario, if you didn't have that information, and if you have a Sally in your organization that has some really weird VPN activity, there's no way for you to know that. There's no way for you to navigate that and say, hey, why is Sally suddenly connecting? She only connects once every 3 months because of this report. Or she only does this when she travels to conferences and she's still here. You have to have that level of information to have a good idea. Now you may have 100 people that VPN. So you may have to look at this, sporadically. You may have to create some trend charts. You may have to run some reports. Hopefully everybody has a firewall where you can do that, or you've got a good logging mechanism or SIM platform where you can export that information and look at trends and understand what's going on. I'm dealing with a client right now that had 900 people enabled for remote VPN access. They didn't really know why, they just did. And that's really, really hard to understand what's valid and what's not. So you've got to figure that out. Geolocation filters. Everybody understand what I'm saying when I say geolocation filters? You should have filters on your firewall that say you can only connect from the U.S. or you can only connect from the U.S. and these other trusted countries, or you can get very granular. You can only connect from these regions of the U.S. if you want to. That is very, very important. I have seen people get attacked. I've seen them get bit just by simply turning that off for a period of time during testing and forgetting to turn it back on, and seen that overload a firewall. I've seen us to have to see firewalls go into what they call low power mode, where they just don't have the throughput because of the attack mechanisms that come in once an international player sees a VPN available. So you need to be aware of that. If what we just talked about happened, if you had Sally in your organization, who would have invoked their incident response plan? Why not? Or who would? Or you said you would have. Why would you have?
Because it's, I mean, to me, it's out of her normal scope of what she does.
Okay.
I would not want to take that chance that I would go question her and ask her, you know, was it you and stuff like that. I wouldn't want to take that chance and say, oh, it's her. I'm just going to move forward.
Well, that makes sense. For the rest of you that didn't raise your hand, why would you not invoke your incident response plan? What's your reasoning?
I just pick up the phone, cell phone. Most anybody that's got anything in our organization is an officer of the bank and has a cell phone.
Okay.
It's a quick phone call.
So you're going to verify before you invoke. Makes sense. And I think both can be valid. It depends on what your investigated methodology is. It depends on how granular your incident response plan. You may have a simple verification process in your incident response plan. So IRPs can say we have preventative, then we're going to investigate, and we can stop there. And that may be a mechanism as well. Both are valid. I tend to see less folks that would invoke incident response plan at this point, but we're going to have a couple events where that scenario may change. So let's talk about the next event. Bob sysadmin. Bob's a server administrator for your organization. He receives a prompt on his laptop one day to update his VPN client, and for some reason it is saying he has to use domain administrative privileges. This seems a little unusual, but updates happen from time to time. Bob's in a hurry, so he keys in his separate domain admin credentials, reboots his laptop, everything seems fine. Bob notices over the next couple of days that for some reason his domain admin credentials keep getting locked out. He keeps getting prompted that his credentials are locked out. Doesn't spend a whole lot of time investigating it, messes around a little bit, doesn't know what's up, unlocks them a couple of times, finally says, I'm going to reset my password on day 3. Problem seems to go away. So we've had a weird update, and we've had some odd account lockouts with a domain administrative password, so privileged credentials. So let's talk about a couple of questions around this. Do all of your administrators, all of your privileged users have dual sets of credentials? Do they have credentials for day-to-day email and laptop that have no privileges above domain user, and then a separate set of administrative privileges, or do they simply function as an administrator? Do you log and investigate account lockouts, especially for privileged user accounts? So do you dig into those when you see those and understand why it happened? Are updates to your applications and systems thoroughly documented via change control and properly communicated? So in other words, would there be a very clear path as to why a user was or was not prompted to update an application? And once again, in this scenario, would this specific scenario, this piece, prompt you to trigger your incident response plan? And I'll even go a step further, and we can talk about this. Would this plus the previous event together in your mind invoke your incident response plan? So once again, let's start the clock and talk amongst ourselves. Hopefully everybody's had a good amount of time to discuss these scenarios. Let's get back to our questions and see where everybody's at. First question, do all of your administrative users have dual credentials? Do anybody not use dual credentials for their admins? Anybody not understand why that's important? I hear laughter, so everybody understands why that's important. We have to make sure we not only do this, none of them are in this room, so I'll talk about them. I have clients that use dual credentials for their admins. And then I will run reports and see which credentials are active but haven't been used in the last 30 days and find out that they're not using their dual admins. They may just fall back to using the administrator account because it's easier to remember. Which, by the way, when you do that, you have no forensic path because you don't know who did what. It's a generic account in your network. Hopefully you don't allow that generic account in your network. I have others that just sign in with their domain admin credentials all the time and leave those regular user accounts dormant. You can track this. It's very easy to run a report on your Active Directory or whatever LDAP you use and say, show me any account that's active on this network but hasn't authenticated in the last 30 days. You should do this every month. It can be very eye-opening. I will pick on Tina and she can tell you how much fun that report is to review. We do all kinds of neat things with that report. Lots of folks do. It has a lot of value. So think about that. Not only do they need to have these credentials, you need to make sure they're using these credentials appropriately. Account lockouts for privileged accounts Are these regularly investigated? Do you have a good forensic path? How'd somebody answer that? How do you investigate these lockouts, and what's your forensic path?
We use safe systems, and we get a tool, it's called Lookout. It sends a notification when somebody locks out.
Mm-hmm.
So if they haven't called us already, then we take that lookout and we call the employee
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that they locked themselves out. If not, we can look at where it was locked out and say, oh, did you log in on this other computer? And then we know that someone's come behind them and tried to log in and lock them out.
Fantastic.
So that's what.
Excellent. Who else? Anybody? It's great to have these tools. That is a fantastic use of that tool. I need to step up to the microphone. Make sure that you keep that data forensically for a good period of time. You want to have at least 90 days available online. You may want to keep up to 12 months if you have to go back and look at a forensic history of that kind of stuff. It is important to have those logs. I'll share some examples as we go through this. How's your change control process? Do you have a clear paper trail, a clear electronic trail for any type of update that's out there in your environment? Anybody challenged by change control? Be honest. I am. We battle it all the time at my organization. And we run ticketing systems for thousands and thousands of users. You have to make sure you track it. You have to make sure that we all do it in different ways, and that's great. You have to know that you can very quickly point to, yes, we authorize this. This is how we authorize this. This is how this should play out. And by the way, if there's an error, this is how we back out of it. You need to make sure you have that information. A lot of third-party auditors out there and organizations are saying not only do you need all that information, but you need a cybersecurity evaluation of the update as well. So did you look at the impact of that update from a cybersecurity perspective? So we're seeing more and more feedback on how we manage our change control. For this scenario, would this scenario by itself trigger your incident response plan? How many say yes? How many say no? Well, I'm assuming if you said yes, you didn't, so everybody else says no, it doesn't. What if you had both of these incidents together? You were aware of both Sally and Bob. Would that trigger your incident response plan? Yep. I see all heads nodding yes. And that's good, because this is why we talk about log collection and correlation. It's one thing to collect logs. It's one thing to have logs all in a central location. You need to correlate data. One of these incidents by itself probably doesn't trigger instant response. The other incident by itself doesn't trigger instant response. Both incidents together, both situations together, trigger instant response. This is correlated data. This is why we use SIM platforms. This is why we use good tools to say A plus B equals a threat, and we need to investigate that. Let's talk about our third event. This is when it starts getting really fun. At about 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, the IT department receives an email alert from their EDR platform. So for you, insert your AV platform, your EDR platform, your MDR platform, your XDR platform, or whatever acronym your vendor of choice uses at this time, your AV solution, your endpoint defense solution against malware. They receive an alert from that platform noting that a PowerShell script was triggered on one of the bank's file servers. At about 8 o'clock, so about an hour later, you start getting multiple alerts coming into the IT department regarding some type of ransomware activity, that there is attempted encryption on endpoints and on servers. PCs are starting to actively be isolated on your network. They're dropping off. They can't connect to anything. Users begin to call the IT support desk reporting issues, signing onto their workstations, and or accessing file shares on your network. So here's some fun questions to kick around in your 5-minute session. Is PowerShell enabled on your network? I know this is a hot topic. I know a lot of auditors say you should never run PowerShell, others say you can, and then in the middle there is, well, how do we monitor it and restrict it and isolate it? If you're running PowerShell, is it restricted to specific functions and or devices and or users? In other words, you have learned behavior that is allowed. Is your EDR, MDR platform capable of, I'm skipping questions here. Is it managed and monitored by a third-party SOC? In other words, is your endpoint defense solution monitored 24/7, 365 by somebody who will pick up the phone and call you? Because I'm assuming everybody in this room sleeps at some point. You're not sitting there with that console up going, is it happening? Is it happening? You need to pay somebody else to do that. So make sure it's monitored. So talk about that and talk about what that monitoring looks like, what those responses look like in your organization. Is network, this is where I started to go a second ago, is network isolation configured for your EDR, MDR, your AV platform, or if you have a remote management and monitoring tool, like Ninja or RMM or some of the other tools that are out there, is network isolation enabled, which means if it sees malicious activity, if it sees attempted ransomware, if it sees something performing lateral movement from computer to computer or attempting to encrypt files, will it stop that computer from communicating on the network and report only to the console? That's very, very important. You still want to be able to monitor it and know what's going on. You just don't want to let it talk to anything else. So talk through that scenario in your organization. I think I know the answer to this question, but would this incident trigger your incident response plan? I would bet it does for everybody. Once it does, how do you start communicating with your regulators and other third parties that need to be informed? So what does communication look like at this point? So once again, let me start the clock for us. How do you approach PowerShell in your organization? Anybody have any questions about what PowerShell is and why it's iffy? Yes, ma'am. So PowerShell, for those of you who don't know, PowerShell is, I just use this example. It is command line authority on a PC on steroids. PowerShell is the tool that allows you to script and execute code and applications and installs and network commands and all kinds of things at an administrative privilege on a Windows computer. If you've got a program that rolls out software for you, it's probably using PowerShell on the back end. If you have automated queries to figure out things that are going on in your Active Directory, you're probably using PowerShell to do that, or the tools you're using are using PowerShell on the back end. So PowerShell is a fantastic tool. It is amazing what you can accomplish with it if you're well versed, but it can also be very, very dangerous in the wrong hands. So lots of auditors will tell you, make sure you disable PowerShell everywhere. That can be good, that can be secure, but it can also tie the hands of your administrators and take away some things that they need to be able to do. So the middle ground is to approach PowerShell with some type of zero trust platform. So allow PowerShell, but put boundaries around what can use it, when it can be used, who can use it, how they can use it, what's allowed and what's not. It may surprise you, but I can tell Microsoft Word to execute a PowerShell script for me. So you can open a Word document in the background, it automatically launches PowerShell and does something horrible on your computer. This is how we get a lot of malware. But I can also tell a zero trust platform to say, don't allow Word to run PowerShell, only allow these admins to do it in these ways with these tools. So PowerShell's great, make sure you secure it.
So how would you, okay, so we have threat locker, so that's gonna track hours.
Yes.
But for someone that doesn't have a program like that, how are you gonna track someone that's pushed it and they're doing something wrong?
Tracking PowerShell is challenging, especially at the workstation level. So Tina asked the question for those who couldn't hear, how would you track this if you don't? So she mentioned First Century uses Threat Locker. I'm a huge fan of Threat Locker. If you don't have Threat Locker, I highly recommend it. It's a zero trust platform that allows you to control every aspect of what runs, when it runs. You can ring fence applications. So to the example I was saying, I can tell Word, you can be Word all day long. Anybody can run Word, but don't let Word do these other things. I can say, allow this user to have administrative privileges for the next 30 seconds to run this executable to update their computer and then tear it away. You can be very granular in your controls with that type of tool. If you don't have those tools, it can be challenging. For your servers, hopefully you're logging all of your servers all the time, so you're getting detailed system logs from all of your servers, and you can go look to see was PowerShell executed, what happened, all of that kind of thing. Even just a few years ago, we talked about let's make sure we get critical servers logged to our SIM platform, to our logging platform, things like domain controllers and our AV servers and those types of things. Now we really need to log every server because we need to understand, is there lateral movement? Are there things going on from server to server or files moving around? With endpoints, you may not have that logging, and it does become challenging. To your point, Tina, you need to fall back on what are you using for your remote management and monitoring tool, what you use to remote control your computers and log your computers and inventory your computers and do all those things. Maybe it has the logs that you need. Some do, some don't. But you need to think about that if you're going to allow PowerShell in your environment. What are the questions about PowerShell? Who here has 24/7, 365 monitoring for your MDR, EDR, XDR platform. So about 15%, 20%. You really, really need to think about this. You need to make sure somebody's looking all the time. The bad guys don't go home at 5. They don't work in our time zone. We have to be aware of what's going on. We have to be aware who can manage that, who can monitor that. And back to the isolation question we're going to ask, you've got to make sure somebody's managing that console and actively remediating these threats in real time. So if you've got, an MDR like Sentinel-1, or when Sentinel-1 sort of falls in the XDR category, but let's say you've got Sentinel-1 and it's being managed by a third party, then they're not only going to see the alert, let you know about the alert, but they're going to go ahead and start quarantining things. They're going to go ahead and start forensically analyzing things. They're going to go ahead and start the isolation process and all of those things to make sure you're safe. And if it happens at 2 p.m. in the afternoon when you're sitting at your desk with nothing to do, that's great, you can do that. I don't know of any of us that are sitting at our desk at 2 p.m. with nothing to do. You're certainly not sitting around at 3 a.m. watching. So you need to make sure you've got folks that are monitoring that solution for you. Network isolation. Who here is aware of your endpoint? Does it or does it not provide isolation services for your endpoints? I get 2, 3, 4 hands, 5 hands. That's good. It's very important. Forensically, the first thing you'll hear from anybody that comes and says, this computer is doing something anomalous, they'll never tell you to turn it off. What do? You go and plug the network cable. Let it keep running, so I've got the forensic information I need to figure out what's going on, but let's not let it talk to anything else. Your MDR, XDR should be able to isolate that workstation and say, it can only talk to the management console, it can't talk to the rest of my network. If it can't do it, hopefully your RMM, your remote management monitoring, whatever you use to control and inventory your PCs can do that as well. But it's very important that you have that isolation function. Otherwise, if you start turning those devices off, you may not have the forensic information you need to solve the problem. You may not have what your regulators are going to ask for. You may not have what your cyber insurance is going to ask for. So you need to make sure to preserve information at every opportunity. Talked about this. Would anybody not trigger their instant response plan in this situation? I'm curious. I mean, some people have a higher threshold. I'm curious. Okay, so we've all triggered our instant response plan. What does your notification process look like at this point? Everybody here knows you've got 36 hours to do a lot of things. So walk me through how you notify. What do you do in this situation?
Within our policy, we've got sample letters and steps that we follow to make sure that we're checking off that we've notified this person, we've notified that person. So if you notify them by mail, you're going to, of course, want to send an email. Also, if you have that ability to make sure that they've received that information.
Well, and to your point, hopefully we haven't even reached the end user notification process. We're talking about right now, you got to notify your regulators. You got to notify your cyber insurance company. In fact, they're probably going to be upset if you haven't already notified them in the first 15 minutes. A lot of you have cyber insurance. Go ahead, yeah.
I was going to tell you, we had some extensive conversations with our insurance company travelers. We got on the call with some group that they have out of Illinois, I think it was the Chicago area. And they flat told us, don't do anything until you call us first.
Yep.
Our whole team will walk you through step by step. Anything that you need to do is call us first. We've got connections, if you need an expert in this, we've got someone that will just get right on that case because we share a common interest at this point.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's the path I was going. Insurance needs to be, if not your first call, one of your very first calls. You're going to start triaging out of instinct. You're going to try and make sure users are safe and systems are available, and I don't want to have to shut the doors to the bank type of scenario, but you need to call insurance. Because to your point, they not only have advice in terms of what they can help you pay for or not pay for, they have attorneys on standby. They have public relation folks on standby. They have forensic resources on standby. Many of you have an agreement that probably states you have to use their forensic team to get paid. So you want to make sure they're involved and they're involved early. I have helped a client navigate this, and it is tremendously advantageous to let insurance take that role. I don't care if you've got an all-star team of forensic IT people at your disposal in your office, get insurance involved and let them help. Because what you may have done once or twice, they've done several hundred times in the last month. So be aware of that expertise and take advantage.
Yeah, I'm just
Mhm.
But if we've got 36 hours and we're like early on in this process here, I mean, why would it be necessary to go ahead and notify the state or federal regulators when you don't really have an idea, have any kind of details at this point?
The reason I start that clock is it makes sure you're inside of that clock. I can tell you, you very quickly start losing track of time in these scenarios. You'd be amazed, something that starts at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning and you're 9 o'clock that night still working on things and getting people up, and you realize, I just lost a day. If you go, you don't have to tell them everything. What I recommend is send an email, have that content information in your IRP, send a quick email to the folks who you need to notify. An email is sufficient, and say, we're experiencing an issue. I want to make you aware we're experiencing an issue. I don't have all the details yet. We will be in touch with further information. That has satisfied your notification process and gives you room to breathe.
But what if your regulators like, we don't want to know that information until you know just a little bit more? We actually had an incident with a third party here a couple of years ago, and we started the clock as soon as we knew there was an incident, and we were waiting for information back from the third party, and we called the TDFI, we called Josh Robinson, we called him, and see, when did we need to let them know? But it was up till like 24 hours before we knew exactly, yes, this was an incident that happened.
Right.
And he told us then, he said, get as much information as you can, before you call, let us know. You may not know everything that said, but if you just getting started on it, he said, don't worry as much about it when you can. He's obviously not, telling us that you can.
Right.
He said, just get as much, details as you can on it.
No, and I think that's fair, but the other side of that coin, and the way I would look at that, is one of the reasons you're notifying regulators is your regulators want to know, is this an attack that more of my clients are seeing? Is this more than just this one situation? Back to the correlated data scenario. So I would think even if they we're under a ransomware attack, we're seeing this activity, we should know more later. That at least tells them, okay, that's the 4th call I've had today in this region. Is there something coordinated going on? So I am always a fan of coordinated incremental communication because it benefits everyone.
And
So.
we had another bank that was close to us that had experienced the same thing. They used the same third party.
Mm-hmm.
And when we made the decision together when to notify both federal and state regulators of it. So we kind of stayed in contact with them on that instance. Now, if it was just us, we got processes in place, every step of the way to when we need to notify our regulators. We got to have these steps met first before we notify.
Yeah, and please, I'm not arguing against your approach. I think it's very sound. Yeah.
I'm just curious your thought process.
Yeah. I can tell you that we were the organization that I've dealt with this particular attack recently. They're not a financial institution. They're a medical provider, and so they're not under the same regulations. They have to notify HHS and some other folks. And we were in hour 30, I think, when we contacted their cyber insurance. And in their opinion, that was 29 hours and 30 minutes too late. They wanted to be involved from day one. And they immediately took care of the notification process for everything else, which was very beneficial as well. So.
It's written in our plan that if we get an incident like this, to notify our cyber insurance as soon as we know anything like this scenario.
Oh yeah.
Up front.
Oh yeah.
Because like you said, they got their forensics team, they got everything that is built into our insurance policy. They would want to help us as much as they can.
No question, and that's exactly what you want to do.
But they have a hotline, they answer 24/7.
Mm-hmm. They do. All right. Any other questions around notification or comments? Let's talk about the next event, and I've got some real world examples to share here. So using your EDR, looking at what you're getting from your EDR, XDR, your MDR, you identify the binary, and you know you're dealing with Inc. ransomware. You find that file, you probably find the README that has the ransomware node, all that information is there. You know, based on your server and your firewall logs, you discover that there's been data exfiltration. Data has left your organization, and it left in the form of compressed RAR files. So, you know, basically a form of zip. The threat actor in this situation actually removed those files after the data transfers. They went back and cleaned up everything. They went back and actually uninstalled the tool they use, uninstalled the compression files once they got them off, and cleaned up. But you can always go back to snapshots of your backup to find out what happened. Hopefully you've got, you know, several of those or some good incremental backups where you can pull that forensic data. You notice that at least 2 of your domain controllers have been manipulated, and you flag those and know that you're going to have to either restore those from backup or rebuild those immediately. And you notice data manipulation on at least one of your file servers and determine that it's going to require some form of restoration from backup as well. So does everybody understand the scenario we're dealing with here? So let me share some files with you. Hopefully you can see on the screen, upper left-hand corner. This is MegaSync, perfectly valid, commercially available, and trusted application. These people are in no way nefarious. This just happens to be the tool one of the tools that Inc. ransomware likes to use to compress and exfil data from servers. Because we talked about the scenario with Bob earlier, they had for at least a period of time access to domain credentials, domain admin credentials, which means they can elevate other credentials, which means they can, you know, navigate the Windows environment pretty effectively. Once they're on that environment, they can dump hash files and start cracking passwords. We saw that in this situation where we saw multiple passwords get cracked and then be moved around in different groups and given different permissions. I actually had some service accounts that were suddenly authorized for remote VPN access, and because MFA wasn't required, you had, you know, the WordPress server VPN at night and all kinds of crazy things like that. But perfectly legitimate way to move data. You can see here in the file hierarchy on the, see if my pointer's working. Oh, it's turned off, hold on. See if we got a pointer here. Here we go. The actual RAR files. We pulled these off of a snapshot backup that had taken place the day before, so we could see that pretty quickly. We mounted that server to the data appliance in this situation. You could look at it in real time while the other server was still up and saw what they did before they cleaned up, which let us have a good idea of forensically what was going on. If you do the math here, and then I add this to the files that we were able to pull off of the SIM platform for what came out of the firewall, and add all that up, we were able to track down between 120 and 150 gig of compressed data that left this network inside of a 24-hour window. That's a lot of data. It's a lot of files. You uncompress that, you're talking about 400 to 500 gig of information when it's all said and done. So a lot of information left very quickly. And then we saw this note. I know it's very hard to read. I'm going to zoom it in here in a second, but this is the actual text README that the ransomware leaves behind to tell you what they're doing. And they're very nice. They tell you what guarantees that we won't fool you. We're not a politically motivated group, and we want nothing more than money. If you pay, we will provide you with decryption software and destroy the stolen data. After you pay the ransom, you will quickly restore your systems and make even more money. Treat this situation simply as paid training for your system administrators because it's due to your corporate network not being properly configured that we were able to attack you. Our pen test services should be paid just like you pay the salaries of your system administrators. Get over it and pay for it. And then they even give references. I love that they give you a Twitter reference. If you don't believe we're as honest as we say, go look at our reviews on Twitter. So, once again, this is a live file. This is real data. They are frighteningly professional in how they do these things. This particular organization I'm working with, I am working as part of the group that's that's stalling with and communicating to the threat actors in this situation. So they have a series of attorneys and forensic IT professionals that are actually communicating to stall as long as we can to get as much information as we can so we have a better understanding of who we need to notify. And I wanted to share, that's why I pulled up my iPad, because I didn't want to put it in the slide. It's a little bit sensitive, but one of their communications back to us in this process As we said, how do we know you did what you did? And what are you asking for? They said, you have experienced a 150 gig leak of critical and sensitive data. We've gone through your files to define your financial abilities. The price for you is $600,000 US in Bitcoin. In case of successful negotiations, we guarantee you will get, like a list of benefits here, full decryption assistance, non-recoverable removal of all downloaded data from our side, and a security report on how you were hacked to fix your vulnerabilities and avoid such situations in the future. We are interested in a quick deal and will be able to slightly reduce our demand in case of quick payment. And they go on to say that we will give you up to 30% of your files in a hierarchy so you know what we took. They go even further than that. They ask that you upload encrypted files to them to validate you are who you say you are in terms of the ransomware threat. So they know how to try and play around law enforcement and other folks pretending to help a client, remediate this type of attack. So these folks are very, very sneaky, and they're very good at what they do. And obviously they want to get paid, so they're going to do everything they can to entice you to do so. So let's talk about event 4. Do you have, based on what we just talked about, all the files, all the RAR, all the data that's been exfiltrated, do you have consistent air-gapped logs for all your critical network and server components for forensic review in this type of situation? The very first thing your cyber insurance forensic team and everybody else is going to ask for is, I need all your logs, and I need to make sure they didn't manipulate your logs. I can tell you the first thing the cyber bad guys are going to do once they get on the server is clean up after themselves, delete the logs, delete your backup agents, delete everything they can to make sure you have to pay the ransom. And we saw evidence of this at multiple levels. So make sure you're logging out of that server somewhere that is air-gapped and safe so you can forensically investigate. How long would it require you to restore multiple domain controllers and a file server in your environment? So start the clock, I have to have those systems up. How long would it take from we need it to it's online and available to our users? And have you tested it? And how often do you test it? Where are you in terms of your incident response plan at this point? So what are you doing in terms of your IRP? Where are you in those steps? And what role, we've talked about this probably extensively at this point, but what role is your cyber insurance provider providing you in this process at this time? So with that, talk amongst yourselves. Let's see where we're at. We're already at 5 o'clock, so I'm not going to get in trouble, and we'll try and speed this up a little bit. I don't want to keep you too late. But let's stop here and talk about these questions. How are your logs air-gapped? Are they protected from the bad guys? Yes or no? Yes, they are. Show of hands. No, they're not. Show of hands. Does it freak you out a little bit? That forensic data is vitally important. Your goal is not to pay the ransom. You never want to have to pay the ransom. FBI is going to tell you not to pay the ransom. Everybody's going to tell you not to pay the ransom. So you want to be able to do the research and understand what was taken, what wasn't, how was I vulnerable, how was I attacked, what was going on, what can I feed to the experts to help me recover from this. Somebody answer this question. How long would it take you to restore 2 domain controllers in a file server?
Wouldn't it depend on what systems you have to be able to spin certain things up?
It does. So Tina's statement is accurate. So it depends on what you're using. Do you have hardware available? Are you using an appliance you can spin them on natively locally? Do you have to pull them down from the cloud and then put them in your VMware environment? It depends on how you're architected. So anybody want to tell me what it would take for you at your organization to spin up 3 servers?
7 minutes?
9. Tina said 7. I'll say 9. We guarantee 12 or less, but if you've got a data appliance and you've got local, which you do, you've got local compute, and we did this, I showed you the screenshots, you know those servers online in 10 or 15 minutes. If you're replicating somewhere or you're using some other type of VMware replication, you've got a hot site that's available, you may be able to bring those up just as quickly. If you've got to pull them back down from the cloud and then spin up those images in the VMware server, depends on how big those servers were. I can stand up a domain controller pretty quick, even, bare metal. I can go to a VMware environment, build the server from a gold image, spin up those DC functions, have it up and running probably in half an hour to an hour. It's not bad. Depends on how big your file server is, though. If you've got a file server that's got 2 or 3 terabytes worth of files on it, it's a lot of data to move, even in a compressed environment. I'll tell on myself, back in the day, I worked for a small regional grocer, and we did SAN-to-SAN replication, and we thought we had everything under control, and we had that SAN backed up to, I'll show my age, old LTO tapes back in the day. And we thought, okay, well, we've lost the SAN, we'll just fall back to tape. This was a 65 terabyte SAN back in the day. We did the math on the tapes. It was going to take us 2.5 weeks to read the tapes. So you've got to have done that math and tested the process to know how quickly you can recover. Because that data, I guarantee you, is very, very important to your organization. We want to talk about where you are in your incident response plan at this point and where you are with your cyber insurance folks.
At this point, you should be have already got your team deployed and meeting to see what the next steps would be.
Yeah, so to this point, you've got your team, you're in a room, you're meeting to determine what our next steps are. You're hopefully talking about our remediation strategy. You're talking about what hardware do we have available. How are we going to deal with these PCs that have had some level of infection? We've got a bunch of stuff isolated. We're communicating. We're trying to figure out how much data we lost. We're trying to figure out who that data impacted. So did it impact clients? Did it impact just internal users? Who do we have to notify? You're in that response remediation area. Questions on that front? All right, event 5, and we'll try and get through this as quickly as we can, but have a good conversation around it. You've been through all of that meeting, you've spent that time, you've determined about 30% of all of your workstations have been affected in this cyber incident. Now let me be very clear, I'm going to be very clear here. This doesn't mean you lost them to ransomware, but it means your tools probably stopped the ransomware but isolated them, so they're a brick to you right now. And you've got to go through the process of verifying there's nothing malicious still on that computer and it's safe to take it out of isolation, which is a process in and of itself. You've got some data loss, and we've talked about you may have to re-image some things at the server level. You're probably going to do that from your workstations as well. You're working with the forensic team from your cyber insurance company. You've got a rough idea of the data that's stolen. Working with your ISO and your privacy officer, you begin the process for legal and compliance and communication and notification. You probably got attorneys involved through cyber insurance and your in-house counsel, and you're navigating those things. All your branches are operational, but many of them with very limited resources. Depends on where it hit and how quickly it moved. So think about these questions. What are your procedures for addressing affected servers and workstations in this incident? Are you okay to bring them out of isolation? Are you going to say, we need to buy hard drives and re-image the PCs that were infected? Or we're going to trust the existing hard drive and re-image it? What preparations have you already made? What's in your IRP for notification requirements? And how do you address those hardware shortages? What does your IRP say about, we're down 3 PCs at every branch, or 10 PCs at the operations department, or insert area here? So let's take just a minute or two and talk about that, and we'll come back. All right, let's come back real quick and talk through some of these questions. I think we're probably going to have some good conversations in this area. What are your procedures for addressing affected systems? So a system something malicious at least got to, and my tools had to take action on, whether it's a server or workstation.
You're gonna unplug it from your network.
I'm sorry? Tina says unplug it from the network.
Wipe it and re-image.
So wipe and re-image.
I would look for IOCs first.
Yep. You check and see what's there.
And then on procedures, I just had this conversation, I just had a conversation with security when we went to the data center, and they said we're gonna do our test, which is basically secure VPN to get 50 stations. He said, and just to be clear, it's like the ransomware. So we were talking about that, he says, if you have ransomware, notify us, we shut down JConnect, and we won't let you reconnect until you put all new equipment in. Because I think we and I had a discussion.
Yep.
What is new versus just wiping it. The impression I got was just wiping is not good enough, because you and I talked about just getting a new hard drive to reload.
Right. There's a lot of, very good point, Brian. There's a lot of scenarios that play out, and vendors are going to have their own requirements, which makes it very challenging.
And if you've got 30
Yeah, and that's a workstation scenario too. Think about your servers, and think about how quickly you can say, "I'm going to pull that hard drive. I'm going to pull that hardware offline. You know, rebuild, reimage, you know, format if it's SAN, if it's local disk to VM, whatever you've got, and then restore to it. And what does that restoration time look like? For workstations, to your point, Brian, you may have to pull hard drives, you may have to reimage. If you're going to reimage existing hard drives, that's okay. There's safe formatting mechanisms to do that. But a D-band type formatting for a hard drive, depending on the hard drive, it's an M2 or it's another type of solid state drive, it may not survive. They're not designed to take that load in some situations. So you have to work through those scenarios and figure out what you have available. And then to that point, you're probably reallocating folks to safe machines, and you have to have a validation, safe I'm going to use in air quotes, you have to have a validation process to know you trust those safe workstations, or it's something just dormant that hasn't triggered yet. One of the things you're going to run into too, and this is the real world scenario we don't really talk about, and you've heard me say for the last 3 or 4 years, defense in depth is critical. We want as many layers of security as possible. That is as true today as it was 5 years ago. It'll always be true. The problem you're going to run into is when you've got multiple layers involved and there are tools on your endpoints or tools on your servers, one of them is going to catch the bad guy and stop the software from moving. But the others are going to react too. And sometimes they react to each other. So I have seen scenarios where, I'll pick on SentinelOne. SentinelOne's a fantastic MDR. SentinelOne and the management platform that's used for remote control both try and isolate at the same time. And that causes all kinds of host file corruption, because when you isolate, basically you're rewriting the host file and not allowing traffic to go certain places. So you have to deal with, how do I fix that when they compete with each other? A lot of it's a timing thing. At the end of the day, I don't care. I want the device isolated. I'll fix it on the back end. But there's cleanup work that's involved there, and you've got to be prepared for that. You need to have worked through that. Where are you in terms of your notification processes? Anything change? Anything we want to cover on that front? What's your plan for dealing with hardware shortages?
With us, we've got several spare laptops,
Mhm.
so we would deploy those until we could get them, either whatever we decide to do, we would deploy those.
Yeah, so Tina's saying First Century's got multiple laptops on standby. They're patched, they're ready to go. Take them off the shelf and put them where we got to have them. Who else?
We were talking about that we had OTCs, but if they've been offline and they're not being patched, that takes time, and then, other part of it said, well, how do you know that they don't have it? You gotta scan and make sure it doesn't have signs of potential infection, because then they don't run.
Yep. So you got to make sure, to Brian's point, you may have older hardware. You may have to get it up to speed before you can use it. It's got to be patched. It's got to be updated. You may have new versions of your software that haven't been deployed to those devices. And you got to make sure they're safe. So you got to be able to have a mechanism to scan and look for what you know is now the bad guy.
You can also do what we do with those laptops. They're offline, and when it comes time to do the patching, we'll fire them up and let them get patched and shut them back down again.
Exactly, and Gary makes a great point. Have some stuff, guys. That's old school air gapping. That's what we were all taught way back in the day. Just have it offline and disconnect until you need it. Can save you in a lot of situations. So we're a little over time, but I don't want to miss a lessons learned opportunity. How'd you do? How do you feel about where your organization's at?
You know, when you sit here and you talk about it, and you're like, okay, we would do this, we would do that. Do you think you would do okay? Yeah. But being in that seat, as you've seen with multiple companies, you're gonna panic to begin with.
Oh yeah. Tina's right. There's going to be, I don't care how prepared you are, how good your tools are. I don't care if everything works the way it's supposed to. You're still going to freak out. It's still going to be a panic moment because you got attacked. And you've got to work through that. I can tell you, in the scenario we've talked through, in the real world example, our team at Burk probably put in 300 hours, cumulative, man hours, trackable hours in the first 2 days in dealing with response. So that's obviously, you got to do the math. That's multiple engineers working across a 36-hour period. But there's a lot of work that goes on in that scenario. Did you learn anything today that'll make you rethink your plan or revise your plan? Show of hands. Who learned something that will have value to your plan today? Good. So I didn't waste my time standing up here and talking really loud. How would you address Bob sysadmin, the admin who didn't take his account lockouts very seriously? I'm curious. Tina's firing him or killing him. I'm not really sure, but I don't. This is being recorded, so we'll just assume she's firing him. So, anybody else?
I mean, at that time, you broke every control that you have in your bank, and if you've got somebody in that role that's doing that, you do not need them on your team.
That's a valid point. You had people who violated the rules. You broke controls. I will say this. A mentor of mine once said, never fail to take advantage of a good disaster. And there's a lot of ways that plays out. But in this scenario, use it as an opportunity to teach. Go teach everybody else. This is what we did poorly and how we can get better. It's well worth the time and energy. Do you feel like you know how to effectively communicate with your team, with your leadership team, with your board in this type of incident? There are a lot of moving parts. I can tell you in the first 48 hours, I probably had 6 meetings with the leadership team at the organization we're talking about. So we met 2 or 3 times a day the first 2 days. Keep everybody on the same page. Let them calm their teams. Let them know what's going on. Let them understand the expectations in terms of outage. Manage it. What did you do well? What are you proud of that you have that works well? I'm excited you've got great account lockout tools. That's fantastic. You know, we've got great procedures on how to contact regulators. That's awesome. What else? Tina's firing somebody in the first 30 seconds. That's fantastic. I'm all about it. All right. Most important question we'll ask all day, what questions do you have for me? What can I help you with?
I've got a bunch, but we'll wait till.
We'll save it for another day. So my email address is up here. My personal blog is up here. Feel free to peruse and make fun and enjoy. But don't hesitate to reach out. Don't hesitate to email me, to call me. Anything I can ever do to help, anything we can ever do to help. All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Steal my water.